welcome to the TDWG podcast. My name is Paul Davidson.
And my name is Scott Norman.
And today we'll be doing my final for Dr. Metz's LTC 8617, teaching writing in middle and secondary classrooms.
And if you are one of our students who listens to our podcast, please don't run away when you hear final and essay. Don't run away. Stay here for a little bit. We're going to be debating or I guess whether or not you should do 5-paragraph essays. Are they valuable? And I know a lot of you guys argue that with me all the time. So stick around and see if we agree or disagree with you. And if we disagree, let us know in the comments.
All right, so let us start off, and I will start off by just kind of telling you like what a 5-paragraph essay is. So here's what a 5-paragraph essay is. It is, as the name suggests, an essay that has 5 paragraphs in it. The first paragraph is the introduction. You have 3 body paragraphs that support the claim that you make in the introduction, and then you finally have a conclusion that wraps everything up. And so it's a nice, neat, tidy package that teachers love to utilize because it's easy to grade, and it seems like it forces students to stretch their thinking out. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a lot of controversy around this particular idea. In fact, there are 2 camps that kind of set up and have developed out of this.
I am genuinely curious about this because he kind of gave me a little bit of a rundown before we started this on the fact that there is controversy, and I didn't recognize any of the names. So I didn't know what he was talking about, so I'm curious to see who are these people and what do they believe here.
So back in week 10 in this class, we had to read 4 articles in which 2 people were in favor of 5-paragraph essays and 2 people were against. So the 2 people that were against were Nunnally and Wesley, and they kind of argued that the 5-paragraph essay, the genre, that particular genre of essay, stifles writing development. It kind of caps it. Like, students can only get so far with it and kind of forces them down instead of letting them actually flourish and develop into better writers. In fact, they even go further to arguing, which I'm going to talk about here later, that you really don't see a 5-paragraph essay outside of academia. In fact, outside of high school, you really don't see 5-paragraph essays. It's uniquely a high school thing. Then you have CO and Smith, who defend the 5-paragraph essay, and they say that students need it to succeed in academics, and they even argue that many of them won't succeed without it. That's what CO kind of argues, and Smith argues, hey, it worked for me, it'll work for my students. That's how I learned how to write. That means that it will work for them. And she even writes a 5-paragraph essay to argue that particular fact.
So essentially, one side is saying it limits development, and the other side is saying
it's needed for the development to occur.
Yeah, that you have to. It's scaffolding for development.
Yes.
Okay. I can see a little bit of both. I can understand why you could see it as a little bit of a cap on development, because when I was personally in high school, we were just discussing the fact that I talked teachers into letting me turn in like video essays and things like that because I felt like I wanted to get more creative than just the structure. So I can see that, but also if I wasn't forced to write essays prior to that, I don't know. What is your opinion on this?
Well, all right, so my position, let me start off with how I originally used to think about it.
Okay.
So back whenever I first started teaching, I had no prior English teaching experience. I was a social studies major in high school. I got dropped into an English classroom, and so I found the 5-paragraph essay and discovered it, and it seemed to be a really good thing, and it worked really well for me at the beginning there. And it seemed to hit all the boxes of dealing with structure, organization, development, all those things that me as a young teacher was like, hey, this is great. This is hitting this is hitting everything I needed to hit. Mm-hmm. I soon discovered, like, as I grew as an English teacher, that even though it did provide that structure for my struggling writers, it did seem kind of to limit it. And in fact, like, there's, I believe it was the Wesley article where she argues that one of her students said, I have a 5-page paper. How am I going to fit 5 paragraphs into 5 pages? And so quickly, that 5-paragraph essay kind of caps it to that 1 page, and if you want to stretch any further, you really can't. But I was still stuck with that 5-paragraph mindset, saying, no, this is the way that we have to do things because of the stupid test, that kept it from happening. When I took a class called teaching reading and writing nonfiction when I first started this master's program. That's when I really started to change my mind on the 5-paragraph essay and kind of seeing the limitations that it presents. And so what I begin to see is what I originally thought was the scaffolding to help my struggling writers grow as writers actually was a cage I was putting them in. They could only get so far, and once they filled out that entire cage, that's as far as they would go. They were just doing the bare minimum, just doing what the bare structure of the 5-paragraph essay asked, and they wouldn't go much further. And then on the other side of it, my more talented writers, my non-struggling writers, the 5-paragraph essay all of a sudden became a chain or a tether. They would not venture out and do risks. They wanted to make sure that they had the good grade, and so they would just write exactly a 5-paragraph essay and not try to experiment with their writing. And so...
as you say this, examples are popping into my head, like students' faces are flashing through my head as you explain each one of these sides. I like the fact that you're kind of talking about your progress through dealing with whether or not to use it.
My existential crisis about the 5-paragraph essay
is actually kind of following how a student would use a 5-paragraph essay. First, it's just the thing that everyone does, and so you fall back on it and you just do bare minimum of it, kind of like you used it as a teaching device that way. And then the students eventually kind of reach the edges of it and start realizing, wait a minute, this is actually now holding me back if they're seeking to advance. And you're seeing the same thing as a teacher. Wait a minute, this is kind of limiting where I want to go. And then you start going, okay, well, what's next? So I cut you off because you were about to say.
No, it's fine. So as I mentioned earlier, you really don't see 5-paragraph essays outside of school.
Yeah.
Like, the 5-paragraph essays are only really a school thing. So we don't need to completely abandon 5-paragraph essays because they are a useful tool in one specific function. And so I view that we should use 5-paragraph essays as a break glass in case of an emergency style of writing. And too bad that because of how the world that we live in, we're going to have to break that glass every single year. The only time we really need to teach 5-paragraph essays to students is for standardized tests. So we don't need to necessarily dedicate our entire year and our entire curriculum around it, which a lot of schools do because that's all they care about is the test. What we need to do is just wait for that week before they have to take the test. So the week before they take the EOC, the week before they take the ACT. That's when we teach them how a 5-paragraph essay works. You already know these parts. Here's basically what they're looking for. If you hit all of these things, you get yourself a passable essay that people will like. And so that is kind of the way that we need to approach the 5-paragraph essay. It should be used as a break glass in case of emergency only, not necessarily the pillar that we build everything off of.
Okay, so I have a question about that, and you can go ahead and tell me if this is going to be addressed a little bit later. Okay. But when you are arguing for or against a 5-paragraph essay, or when these individuals are arguing for or against a 5-paragraph essay, when I was in school and learning, one of the things that we did is use the basic model, and you and I have kind of come up with the multi-directional thinking, the idea that, there's always the reasons and then the supporting ideas and then evidence for those supporting ideas. Is this arguing against the entire structure of the essay? Like, okay, it could be a 7-paragraph essay with 5 body paragraphs, like all that kind of thing.
Actually, to go even further, like the thing that it's arguing against, the people that argue against it that I kind of fall in favor of, view it as a cage. And basically, if we just lift that cage, all of a sudden those same elements that you're talking about, the intro, body, and conclusion, they'll still be there.
Okay, so you can use the bones of it.
Yes, the bones are still there. And
the cage.
And we'll talk about that much more in depth later. Just the cage, putting that limit of 5 paragraphs on top of it.
Okay.
Or that minimum maximum of 5 paragraphs, that's the problem.
Okay, that it has to hit that exact. Okay,
I got you. And that's the word it's saying. Because, and honestly, like the introduction can be longer than a paragraph. The conclusion can be longer than a paragraph. Most like real world writing that you'll see, they have longer conclusions, longer introductions, and longer bodies. So the point is just getting away from this mindset that my introduction is 1 paragraph, my conclusion is 1 paragraph. Got to have 3 body paragraphs.
Okay, I got you. So if that is no longer the structure that you're leaning towards using, what is going to be the new starting point for teaching writing?
All right, so this guy named Peter Elbow that we read early on this class.
That's an awesome name.
And we also read his book when we did English education with Dr. Metz last spring. Peter Elbow, he argues about this thing called speaking onto the page. If you think about it, for the longest time, we were speaking before we were writing. Writing is a fairly new thing for us humans to do. And Peter Elbow just argues that we just need to actually, and people will often argue, you write like you speak. That's actually a good thing.
I take that as a compliment.
Yeah, that actually is a good thing because that means you actually are you being communicative. So he argues that we need to start with speaking onto the page with free writing. And I started to experiment with that before the pestilence hit us and we had to get out, and it seemed to be working.
Pestilence.
But the big thing that kind of brought my thinking around that Peter Elbow might be onto something is he started talking about blue books in college. I don't even know if they still use blue books in college.
So my years in college, they were transitioning away. I purchased blue books because several classes said, like, you need a blue book for this.
And so you went and threw your dime down,
yes,
you got your blue book.
Come crunch time, though, they said, or you can just use notebook paper. And I was like, I'm going to use notebook paper. That's what I'm used to using.
All right, but the concept of the blue books in college is what kind of wrapped my head around the idea that Peter was arguing for, or Elbow was arguing for, and I was like, hey, that actually makes sense, and I think that he's onto something. So essentially, when you have a blue book test, the professor has a couple essay questions they want you to answer. You really don't have time to kind of formulate what your response is going to be. You kind of just sit down, you get that question, and you just kind of write from the top of your head what the information you're trying to do. And through that, you're speaking onto the page as such. That's the thing, and that's essentially what our students are doing anyway for a lot of the time. Like, yeah, we would like them to kind of go through all the process of pre-writing, drafting, revising, and editing.
Yeah.
But in all honesty, most of them are waiting to the last minute and just spilling their ideas on the paper.
Yeah.
I feel, and Elbow even argues that since they do this in college and the writing is almost exactly as good as it was if it's polished, the polish will be, of course, better. But for the most part, a lot of the elements that the polished version is going to have is in that speaking onto the page that they would have wrote in a blue book.
Yeah.
We need to actually grab a hold of that and utilize that as the starting point, because the kids actually already know what they want to say. They actually already kind of can talk. They can, if they think, you are picturing students in your mind right now.
Yep. I am.
If you ask them a question, they can talk your ear off about that particular question.
Yeah.
But then when you tell them to sit down and write, all of a sudden they're paralyzed and they can't get you anything. They can only get you the bare minimum.
Yeah.
That is because they have this weird disconnect between the language, and they think that because they're writing it down, they have to make it more formalized and more proper. If we remove that properness, all of a sudden they could just speak onto the page, and voila, they have their content.
I think the biggest thing that is coming to my mind talking about that is I have several students, second hour, I'm talking about you, where we have had some of the best debates and conversations about things. They will ask me all these deep questions, like we'll talk, economics or politics, and they'll start asking me, well, why do we do this? How about this? And putting in their input, and we have amazing discussions. And no offense, guys, but they turn in the worst essays because they spend 2 hours of class time begging me, but I don't know how to start it. What do I write? Because I'm supposed to have a hook. I have to have a hook at the start. See? And then I have to, well, what do I don't, that's all I want to say. And it's like, oh God.
And see, if we take the baseball bat and shatter the 5-paragraph essay, that all of a sudden becomes less of a struggle for them. In fact, I would argue that for most classes, most content classes, like you with social studies or with like physical science or biology, most of those content classes, instead of having like tests, you might be better off just doing a blue book type of test in which you say, all right, I have 3 essential questions that we're going to tackle, and here are the 3 essential questions. You have the rest of the hour to answer these questions and then turn it in. And I imagine you would probably get a better response than actually having them do a formalized essay for you.
Yeah, and that's something that I would be interested in looking into. I'm not going to lie, one of the biggest things that I struggle with therein is the same thing that you've been referencing back to, and that is testing. That, for instance, my government class, where that would be an amazing way to do a test at the end of the year, they have to sit down and do 55 multiple choice questions. And so...
But
that struggle.
But think about this: if they had already tackled those essential questions that are at the heart of those multiple choice questions they have to do at the end of the year, but if they already had to tackle that with a higher level task such as writing and speaking onto the page, would that make a stronger connection than them just taking a bunch of multiple choice tests?
Yes, it would, and I guess, and this is something we're referencing back to Fridley. All hail. The idea of building, if you teach them how to build a house, they're going to learn what to do with the bricks Whereas if you just focus on the bricks, you'll end up with a stack of bricks.
A really nice stack of bricks,
yes.
but you really can't use them.
Yeah, and so it's one of those things that I think, in the wrestling back and forth with what to do with this, I think that if for essays I change that and keep the rest of it for now structurally the same until I can get them able to fully express their thoughts in essays, and then I can figure out who is missing the bricks.
So you want to stay with the structure
for now
in order to understand who needs the bricks.
Yeah, no, not necessarily 5-paragraph essay here. Okay. I'm just saying in a government class.
You still need the structure of introduction, body, conclusion.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And here's the thing. A lot of people, when they hear free writing, they're like, "Oh, they don't. That's not actual like proper writing." But the thing that I like
creative writing. I guess.
Here's the thing I like about what it doesn't even have to be creative writing. It can be on nonfiction writing. And here's the way I like how Elbow does it. Mm-hmm. Elbow says you have X amount of time, and you just have to write, and you have to keep writing. Mm-hmm. Like even if you run out of things to write, you either need to keep writing the word, keep writing, or the last word that you did, write that over and over and over again until you're out of your rut and you go back into your flow of thought that you're in. Mm-hmm. Now, here's the thing. If you do it that way, even the students that really just try to put forth the bare minimum, they can see that that's not going to be necessarily a great essay to turn in. Mm-hmm. So that actually would encourage them to go back and revise. And that's the thing that is missing so dearly in high school is that revision step. A lot of the issues that we see in writing, if the students would just step back and reread it and catch those errors and are able to revise it, then they can move forward. And so by forcing them to free write, to speak onto the page, the next step would then be to have them naturally go back and revise. And then through that revision, that's where we begin to get into the more formalized essay that you're normally used to seeing. Mm-hmm. So, and that's what Gallagher talks about. Gallagher goes on a lot about revision, and that's kind of the direction that he goes with too, is that you do need to go back and revise. So with Peter Elbow, we speak onto the page, we get our content. Mm-hmm. And we'll have a bunch of content that we can work with. Then with Kelly Gallagher, we begin to pick up a cookie cutter and start cutting away from the massive amount of dough that we have to revise and edit to suit a particular purpose. And so Kelly Gallagher is all about this purpose-based teaching. And the way he has 6 purposes that he kind of focuses on, that pretty much all writing anything that you write, 90% of it is going to fit one of these 6 purposes. Yeah. 90% of it will fit one of these 6 purposes. And on top of that, a 5-paragraph essay is not going to be the most effective way to accomplish your goal of these 6 purposes. Okay. So the 6 purposes are to express and reflect. So you express upon something that happened to you and reflect how that impacted you. Okay. You inform and explain. You could provide information about something and then you explain what that information was saying. Okay. Then you evaluate and judge. You have an evaluation. You're like, this is what I think about this. And then you kind of judge whether it was good or bad or high quality, low quality. You inquire and explore. You have a question and you find the answers to that question. Mm-hmm. And then you analyze and interpret. You kind of look at all the data in front of you, and then you kind of interpret what that data is trying to tell you. And then the last one, which is the one that we're currently doing, taking a stand and proposing a solution. This is the way I view things, and here's my solution to it. And those are kind of all the things that Gallagher kind of goes towards, and any piece of writing can hit it, and the 5-paragraph essay, although it can address it, it's not the most effective thing that can address it.
Yeah, I was sitting there as you listed that, and I was like, the express and reflect on something, it's like,
you're probably better off doing
today, I was walking to school, and a bus drove by and splashed me with water. I must think about how that affected me. Well, point 1. And then,
that doesn't
make sense,
that
right?
doesn't fit it well into the flow that would a 5-paragraph essay would force you to do.
Yeah. So I can see that. That makes sense.
So that's the big thing. Kelly Gallagher with his purposes and revision. Kelly Gallagher also talks a lot about writing along with your students, so because you're the expert writer in the room, so they need to have you as a model to help you see you work through and you just struggle through your own writing, and that's really scary. I'm not gonna lie, because I've tried to do it before we got out for the plague. But actually, it is pretty helpful.
I will say I tried that one time, I think, and that was it was years ago. It was like my second year of teaching, and I had students that just basically refused to write. They're like, this is too hard. And so finally, I just pulled up, it was back when I had a smart board, and I pulled up on the smart board my computer, and I was like, all right, we're all going to do this at the same time.
Yeah.
And I just started typing, like,
and
as they sat there.
It shows them the process that you're going through.
And so they would see, and like, you know, you have the point where like a kid's like, oh, you misspelled that. I'm like, oh, well, darn it. You have to go back. But they were watching all that happen.
And they see that you make mistakes, you make errors, you have points that you struggle with that you have to think through. They see that this is not everybody's a perfect writer. It takes time to work your way through these things.
So aside from that, kind of the 6 areas that don't fit in, what are some other like ideas or models that we can use here?
Okay, so another thing that could be central that is kind of like which actually is more like the fundamental of what writing is, because whenever you're writing an essay, the word essay, if you go back and look at the etymology of the word, I think etymology is the word I need to use. If you look at the origins of the word essay, it means to argue. You're making an argument. And so you're trying to make a point. You're trying to make an argument. If we start actually teaching kids this thing called the Tolman model, which Smith, Wilhelm, and Fredrickson kind of outline in their book, it's about argumentative writing. If we follow the Tolman model for argumentation, that would be able to help students be able to develop their thoughts a little bit better. And that's where we start to get into paragraphs and to kind of what you're talking about with making sure that they have like enough information, enough content to back up their claim. So the Tolman model has 3 parts to it. And Smith, Wilhelm, and Fredrickson add another part that is the rebuttal. But the Tolman model you have a claim, you have a warrant, and you have data. You have data that backs up your claim, and the warrant kind of is in the middle. Most of the time, the warrant can go unstated, which makes warrants kind of slippery for students to wrap their head around. But the thing is that at the level of writing that most of our students are at, since they are novice writers, they're not experienced enough to put forth claim and data that flow together so nicely that the warrant is clear what they're trying to talk about. So students will probably need to be a little bit more present with their warrant, probably be more forthright with their warrant. Because essentially, here's your claim, here's your data, the warrant is explaining how the data supports the claim. How it connects to the claim.
Yes, okay. That is something that struggles, or I've seen a lot of students struggle with. They'll do the thing where it's like, you know, one of the RSAs that we do every year is I think we should or shouldn't have dropped the atomic bomb, right? And they'll say, we should have dropped the atomic bomb.
That's their claim.
The Japanese killed lots of people.
That's their data.
And I'm like, okay, so why should we have dropped the bomb? And
they're
like,
lacking the warrant.
And they're like, well, the Japanese killed lots of people. And I'm like, but why does that mean we should,
and the warrant is the why. The warrant is the why, and what you're also providing is the rebuttal, the pushback. Yeah. Because often, as you just pointed out, our students will have these house of cards of arguments that if you put them up to any scrutiny because of a weak warrant or weak data, it's going to fall. Yeah. And so if you have them understand what a claim, warrant, and data are, then you have them have to think about the rebuttals. Their arguments become stronger, and you no longer have the house of card effect.
Yeah, I like that has a name now that I can use to explain it.
Yeah, it's the Tolman model. And I need to start using it more often. And overall, in all of our classes, we need to start using it more often because like it would same thing could apply to science. You have a claim and you have data that back up that claim. And then you just most of the time the warrant will be clear. But if it's not clear, you need to kind of explain what the warrant is.
And I personally kind of want to call it the Kool-Aid Man model since the book is called Oh Yeah. Just picturing him busting through a wall and explaining
this actually connects to our little baby that we created, our little concept that we created that is multi-directional thinking.
Yeah.
Where we have back about, how long ago was this? 4 years ago?
Oh gosh, yeah. 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, we had this concept that students need to have low-level, mid-level, and high-level thinking in order to have a fully developed thought. That's what these are. The high-level thinking is the claim, the mid-level thinking is the warrant, and the low-level thinking is the data.
Yeah, and it is that same little.
And you could start at the bottom with observations, which is the data. Then read the patterns, which are the warrant, and then the conclusion, which is the claim.
Yeah, and I was gonna say if somehow we can attach to this.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna have
for your people to see the multi-directional thinking. It is very much so. Those 3 pieces are the 3 pieces of our argument structure. But Yeah, that's really cool. Or investigative structure,
and of
depending on
course,
which side.
and then you could do the other side, which the claim would be your thesis, the warrant would be your reasons, and then the data would be your evidence.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then of course Smith, Wilhelm, and Fredrickson add on the rebuttal, which is just to make sure that you can field opposition. You understand that in an argument, there's hardly ever a one-sided argument. Arguments have two sides. Right now, we're in the middle of an argument about the 5-paragraph essay. There are two sides, and I will eventually be addressing the rebuttal, addressing the people who would push back against this claim that I'm making, that it is only really useful in one particular purpose, the 5-paragraph essay.
So before we get to the rebuttal, is there anything else we need to know about the side arguing in favor of its expansion or destruction?
So start off with free writing, so they get the ideas out in the world. That way they have the content to work with. Then you use the purposes to kind of help focus that content. You have the Tolman model to make sure that the argument is sound. Then we have Nodden. And Nodden kind of falls in line with Kelly Gallagher, and Nodden's kind of where I'm currently at. But so chapter 9 is the chapter we just read last week, and my own personal beliefs in teaching kind of mirror Nodden's, except I was continuing to try to tie them to the 5-paragraph essay.
Yeah.
Nodden views it like this, all right? He describes an essay as like a piano, like playing the piano. You will start off with one particular type of chord, and then you kind of work your way, and then you'll end with a particular type of chord. In between, you're not just going to continue to go back, like work your way up the scale. You're going to be going back and forth, right?
Yeah.
There's going to be a variety of different styles and techniques that you'll use in order to make the piece sound good, in order to make the music listenable. That's what you need to do with an essay. And so instead of us looking at, here's your introduction, this is the only type of introduction you can use, here's your body paragraph, here's how to structure a body paragraph, you has to follow this structure, because there's a variety of different ways you can structure a body paragraph. You can do it like chronological, you can do it cause and effect, problem solution. There's a variety of different ways that you can kind of do that. You don't need to do too many of those in a row. You need to vary it up so the reader's a little bit more engaged with what you're talking about. And then you finish it, and there's a variety of different ways that you can finish it. And so all of a sudden, we are no longer... So basically, Nodden is the connection of taking this from writing and also applying it to reading and kind of smashing them together. Whenever we're reading, all of a sudden, now we are actually exploring how those other authors are using those techniques, how the other authors are using introductions, how they are using their body paragraphs, how they are using their conclusions. And so we go from having students have a Lego box. So we have a Lego box, right? The 5-paragraph essay would be, here is this thing that you need to design and do. And then the approach that I'm arguing for is, instead of saying, here's the Lego box that you have to follow to a T, instead, here's a bunch of Legos, build me a house.
Okay.
And so you learn the different ways of how different blocks would work. Nodden's arguing that we need to teach them how the blocks work in order for them to build the house, instead of saying, here's the blueprint to the house.
So I have talked to you about this before. I was homeschooled for a while, and my mom found this guy that
Is that what you've been looking up on your phone?
Yeah, and I just found him, and I found his face, and I still can't find his name. But it's the Institute for Excellence in Writing is the organization that he works for or might have created. And so you can look up the Institute for Excellence in Writing, and that is very much the same style. He teaches basically how to use all of these tools in writing, and then he'll be like, okay, so write a paragraph where you use 4 of these tools. And don't care what it's about. Just go.
That's a lot of what Nodden argues in his book, Image Grammar.
And I have fallen back on that far more in my writing, even for education, than anything else. And I'll get compliments on, oh, well, you do this so well. Well, it's not something that I'm like, oh, I'm just great at. I learned it in 8th or 9th grade from this course, where
you learned a bunch of different
all
tools.
These different tools.
You learned a bunch of different things that you can throw at to accomplish your purpose.
Exactly.
Instead of just the hammer that is the 5-paragraph essay. Cite Michael Metz, 2020, week 16, because he had that in one of our post descriptions.
Yes, but I just wanted to throw out there, if you were looking for a place that's really good at teaching a toolbox, that Institute for Writing Excellence. is a great place to go.
All right, so that's all. So that's the layout I have. So we need to get rid of the 5-paragraph essay as the central tool. It's now a break glass in case of emergency, and we instead focus on free writing to kind of get the ideas out there, Gallagher to kind of help focus those ideas and polish them up, Tolman to make sure that they're sound, and Nodden to try to brush up on the different tools that the students can use to write.
All right, so I think you're wrong. Give me some evidence that I can use to debate you.
Okay, so if you look at 4A, the first piece of evidence that somebody would throw against me would be what?
I would say that it worked for me.
And that's what Smith is pretty much arguing, is that it worked for me, then why can't it work for my students? And the thing is that far too often we cater to the academically capable because us teachers ourselves were those academically capable students.
Yeah.
And so we see the students that are really talented at school, they know how to play school. They're doing well in these particular assignments because they know how to play ball. And we're missing out on those students that aren't necessarily the academically minded, the ones that do not plan on going to college, the ones that struggle here with school. We're missing out on them, and the 5-paragraph essay is not working for them. It's not engaging them. It's not making them want to write. And so that's the argument that I would have against that. And with my own personal experience, before we were let out for school entirely, we teach in a low socioeconomic area.
Yeah.
We teach with a population of students that are well off and a lot of students that are not so well off.
Yeah, we have a relatively diverse socioeconomic backgrounds here.
In my experimentation with having them use their voice on the page, like just speak to the page, don't worry about, as I told my 7th hour kids, I have a high population of African American kids in 7th hour, they would tell me that it takes me so long to write because I'm writing in my white voice. Don't worry about your white voice. Write in your own voice, and then we'll go back and we'll make it more formal anyway. And in all honesty, it's better to write in that because that's using their actual authentic, their AAVE voice in their writing is actually style. And it allows their writing to actually seem more unique, more interesting, more engaging, and not the dry, boring, lacking character.
Yes, I will tell you this, that someone who reads essays way too much because I assign them, right? I read all of these student essays. The essays that I love to grade, even if they're not 100% essays, which very few of them are, is reading one where I can hear the voice, where I'm like, oh, I don't even have to look at the name on this paper. I know who's writing it. Whereas if I read 3 or 4 in a row that are just that complete archetype paper, I feel like I'm on one of those websites where you can buy essays for free. Of course, sometimes I've found that that's where they came from. But anyway, point being, like, seeing that voice, I will say, just throwing this in there, I guess this is kind of a rebuttal or more of just an observation on Smith's idea here, is that it seems like when you talk to a baseball player who says hitting is easy because it's easy for me, it's the expert blind spot, right? And this is something that we learned in school about be careful to find those areas where you have an expert blind spot, where it's something that you are good at and therefore you think everyone should be good at it.
And that's kind of what Smith is talking about is the expert blind spot.
Yeah.
And now there is one more rebuttal that would possibly get thrown at me.
Oh, yeah, and that is actually one that I understand. I understand this argument, and that is without structure, they can't do it because they're just lost, wandering.
And that's the CO rebuttal. So I used to think the same. And as I mentioned, before the pandemic, I was trying to use elbow speaking onto the page as the central pivot, and it seemed to be working. I'm dead serious. Like, you just let them actually, like, just say, don't worry about using standard English. Just write nonstop exactly what you know, and just let me know. And even though it didn't look pretty, it had the content that I was looking at. And once we had the content, we can always go back and pretty it up. We can always go back and polish it up. We can make it look pretty. The thing that the 5-paragraph essay does is that structure that they think that you think that they need to have, they already kind of naturally, inherently kind of understand it. They understand a little bit of that you do need to have a little bit of a beginning. They do get worried about too much on hooks. So basically what I will tell you is just straight up, just start writing. I need to have a hook. You don't need to have it necessarily hooked. Just at this stage, write exactly what you're thinking. If it's the answer, all right, write the answer, and then just keep on explaining the answer. Keep on providing evidence or keep on providing data and warrants and backing up with the rebuttal. Just write. And then after you have that, after they know what the idea is, all of a sudden actually it's more, you actually have a better idea of how to introduce it. Mm-hmm. Because you can't introduce somebody unless you know them.
So essentially your counter argument is that they are actually more capable without the structure, but they're trying to fit it into the structure, which makes them look incapable.
Yep.
Okay. That makes sense to me.
They have the tools, but we are asking them to play chess whenever they have the capabilities of playing the saxophone.
That's not
For
where I thought that
a
was
really
going.
crazy mixed metaphor, that's kind of what I'm saying. And I only said saxophone because I see a picture of a saxophone behind your head.
Yeah, we are in an interesting new recording studio here that might sometimes see the light of day.
And then there's one more rebuttal that some of my classmates have been saying, and some classmates say that they've been talking about scaffolding it down for their middle school students. Mm-hmm. And I can see where they're coming from with that. But if you feel the need to schoolify writing this way, I would take Nodden's approach. So instead of worrying about making sure they have the introduction, body, conclusion, I would focus more on making sure they understand and mastered how to use those Legos to put those in place. So I would focus on those smaller chunks, those smaller sections if you really want to scaffold this. And then once they have a better idea of how those smaller structures work together, then you can slice them, then you can stack them together, and voila, you have an essay.
If you need some resources, look for the Institute of Excellence. Right. Sorry, I still pulled up on my phone.
So, but that's my argument. That's my final that I have. A 5-paragraph essay should only be used in one specific case, which is standardized testing. Other than that, let students free. Don't shackle them. Don't put them in cages. Let them write and let the writing actually flow, and then you can kind of show. You can help guide the direction that the flow is going, but you need to at least let the flow start.
Well, I have to say, legitimately, like, this is not, for those of you podcast listeners, this is not just me like, okay, we prepared this part. Legitimately, I am way more convinced.
Oh, yeah.
Like, this was pretty darn convincing.
Talking on the way down, Mr. Norman was 100% 5-paragraph essay.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
I was like, oh no, this is going to be a big argument. But no, it appears to have worked.
No, because it does. Like I said, very much it takes me back to the stuff that really helped me. And that was more of, what's-his-face, Nodden, and that idea of just getting it all down, and then you can professionalize it later.
Elbow is get it down.
Okay.
Elbow is get it down and professionalize it. Nodden is focus on on
the tools that you can
here's
use.
Here's how to use this specific tool.
Yeah, giving them a toolbox to use as they lay it out and tweak it. But yeah, I mean, I'm pretty convinced.
Well, good.
Students, if you're not convinced, tell us why you want to write 5-paragraph essays instead. But since we are arguing in favor of not doing 5 paragraphs, but allowing you to use your voice, I mean, I feel like you should be on our side, right? Let us know.
Hopefully. Anyway, so classmates, I hope you enjoyed. Dr. Metz, I hope you enjoyed. Students, we miss you dearly.
Absolutely.
And until next time, my name's been Paul Davidson.
And my name is, and Lord willing will be, Scott Norman.
And we've been 2
Dumb Woke Guys.